By the middle of the 14th century, London was the largest and most powerful city in England, but it was also one of the most dangerous places on earth. Not because of war, not because of crime, but because of something invisible, something no one understood. This is medieval London, 1300s, a city of 80,000 souls, crammed within ancient Roman walls, governed by kings and guilds, haunted by plague, and driven by trade. What you are about to see is not the London of fairy tales and knights in shining armour. This is the real city, loud, dirty, dangerous, and completely alive.
In the year 1300, London was at the height of its medieval power. The population had reached nearly 80,000, more than 3 times the size of any other English city. London Bridge, the only crossing of the Thames, was covered in shops and houses. The Tower of London loomed over the eastern skyline, a symbol of royal authority and fear. Westminster, just to the west, housed the Royal Palace and the Great Abbey. Between them lay a city of narrow streets, timber-framed houses, bustling markets, and countless churches. There were over 100 parish churches within the city walls alone. Every street had a smell. Every corner had a trade. Bread Street smelled of fresh loaves. Threadneedle Street rang with the sound of tailors at work. And Smithfield, the great open market just outside the walls, roared with the noise of livestock. This was the greatest city in England, and it was about to be shattered. Walking through London in the 1300s was an assault on every sense. The streets were narrow, some barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. They were unpaved and became rivers of mud when it rained. But the mud was not just earth. It was mixed with animal dung, rotting food, discarded offal from butchers, and raw sewage from overflowing cesspits. The city had no sewer system. Waste went into the streets, into the rivers, or into pits beneath houses. Pigs roamed freely, eating garbage. Stray dogs fought over scraps. The situation became so severe that King Edward III himself sent a formal complaint to the Mayor of London about the stench rising from the streets near the Thames. And yet, this was also a city of colour and noise. Market stalls lined Cheapside, the main commercial street, selling spices, cloth, and foreign goods. Street vendors called out their wares. Guild banners hung from buildings. Church bells rang the hours. London was filthy, crowded, and chaotic. But it was also extraordinary. Medieval London was a city of extreme inequality. At the top were the merchant elite, wealthy traders who controlled the import and export of goods. They lived in spacious stone houses on the Strand, the prime real estate of the city. They wore pointed leather shoes with fine designs, dressed in the latest fashions from France and Italy. Below them were the craftsmen and tradespeople, organised into powerful guilds. Blacksmiths, weavers, bakers, carpenters. Each guild controlled its trade, set prices, trained apprentices, and protected its members. The guilds were the backbone of medieval London's economy. And at the bottom, the poor. They wore patched and repaired second-hand shoes, lived in cramped rooms, and depended on the charity of churches and monasteries. Many begged in the streets. Others performed the most dangerous and disgusting jobs the city required. London was also, surprisingly, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in Europe. Walking through its streets, you would hear Italian, Flemish, German, and Spanish, alongside English and French. Foreign merchants had established permanent offices here. The Alberti family from Florence was so active in London's trade that Parliament singled them out by name. In the autumn of 1348, something arrived in London that would change the city forever. The Black Death, bubonic plague, had swept across Europe from Central Asia. It had already destroyed cities in France and Italy. Now it reached England. Within weeks, people were dying in the streets. The symptoms were unmistakable. Swollen black lumps in the armpits and groin. Fever. Vomiting of blood. Death within days. Londoners did not know what caused it. Some believed it was carried on bad air. Others thought it was punishment from God. They burned fragrant wood to mask the smell. They sealed windows shut. None of it worked. We now know the disease was spread by fleas living on black rats, the very rats that fed on London's mountains of street garbage. The city's own filth had created the perfect conditions for catastrophe. At its height, the plague killed so fast that churchyards could not hold the bodies. Churches leased extra land for mass burials. Emergency plague pits were dug at East Smithfield, Charterhouse Square, and Greyfriars. 636 bodies were excavated from East Smithfield alone in the 1980s. By the time the plague subsided, it had killed an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of London's entire population. The city that had stood at 80,000 in 1300 was reduced to perhaps 40,000 by the 1370s. It would take over 150 years for London's population to recover. The Black Death did not just kill people, it changed everything. With so many workers dead, those who survived found themselves with unexpected power. Labour was scarce, wages rose. Peasants and workers, who had been tied to their lords for generations, began demanding better conditions, higher pay, and more freedom. The old feudal order began to crack. But the plague kept returning. It came back in 1361, again in 1369, in 1394, in 1407. Each outbreak killed thousands more. The city lived in constant fear, and the cost of war made everything worse. England was engaged in the 100 Years' War against France, a conflict that drained the treasury and forced kings to raise taxes repeatedly. London, already reeling from plague, faced bankruptcy and resentment. In 1381, the Peasants' Revolt erupted. Thousands marched on London, burned buildings, opened prisons, and beheaded the Archbishop of Canterbury. The establishment had been shaken to its foundation. Despite the chaos and death, London remained the commercial heart of England. The River Thames was its lifeline. Ships arrived daily from Flanders, Venice, Genoa, and the Baltic, carrying silk, spices, wine, and exotic goods. English wool and cloth left in return, feeding the textile industries of Europe. The docks along the Thames were always in motion, stevedores unloading cargo, merchants examining goods, tax collectors recording everything. London was not just the capital of England, it was England's gateway to the world. The wealth that flowed through the Thames funded the king's wars, built the city's great churches, and made London's merchant elite among the richest people in Europe. In medieval London, religion was not a Sunday activity. It was the structure of life itself. The city had over 100 parish churches within its walls. Beyond them were great monasteries, friaries, and convents. Westminster Abbey, just outside the city walls, was among the most sacred places in England. 28 of its monks died in the Black Death, including the abbot himself. The church calendar dictated the rhythm of the year. Holy days were public holidays. Religious guilds organised festivals and processions through the streets. Mystery plays, theatrical performances of Bible stories, were performed by the trade guilds on mobile stages drawn through the city. Medicine, too, was inseparable from religion. Hospitals were run by monastic orders. St. Bartholomew's Hospital and St. Thomas's Hospital, both still operating today, were founded by Augustinian canons in the 12th century. In 1247, the Priory of St. Mary Bethlehem was founded. By 1403, it had become a hospital for the mentally ill, the notorious Bedlam. Faith was not just comfort, it was infrastructure. Medieval London was a city that needed constant policing. The streets after dark were dangerous. The city gates were locked at night. A curfew bell rang in the evening, and those caught outside after dark were arrested. Crime was common. Theft, assault, and fraud were everyday realities. Public punishment was equally common. The pillory stood in Cheapside. Criminals were publicly shamed, pelted with rotten food, or had their ears nailed to the wood. Executions were public spectacles held at Smithfield and Tower Hill. The law was brutal, but enforcement was inconsistent. Corruption was widespread. Rich merchants could bribe officials. Poor labourers had little protection. Foreigners were frequently scapegoated. During times of crisis, plague, famine, or military defeat, violence against outsiders surged. In 1190, London's Jewish community had been massacred. In 1290, Jews had been expelled from England entirely, their property was seized, their synagogues repurposed. It would be nearly 400 years before they were allowed to return. This was London in the 1300s, a city of power and poverty, of faith and fear, of incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable death. The streets that were once rivers of mud and plague are now among the most visited in the world. But beneath the modern surface, the medieval city still exists, in the names of streets, the foundations of churches, the layout of the old Roman walls. If you'd like to see another city brought back to life, another moment in history explored, let me know in the comments below. The past is never as far away as we think. Thank you for watching.